I'm working so hard to gain muscle. Yeah, but it's so slow. Body recomp is. Maybe it's my age. I mean, I'm training hard. I know what to do. Please, your age isn't an excuse. But I'm doing everything right. Are you? Because it seems like you're throwing away some of your gains. Gaining muscle is hard, and it's a slow process. And our age and our training experience both have an impact on the rate at which we see results. Not to mention, we sometimes have to let go of previous dieting and training practices that got us to the point we're at right now. And that's not always easy to do. They can be holding us back. That's why I want to go over 4 key components to help you dial in your training and your nutrition to see those fabulous muscle gains no matter your age and no matter your training experience. But I think it's first key we really understand the rate at which we can expect to see results. Lyle McDonald determined the average amount of muscle you could potentially gain based on years of training experience. And the newer a lifter you are, the more muscle you're going to see creep on. Those newbie gains are truly real. Versus the more advanced a trainee you are, the slower your results are going to be because you're able to handle more of that volume, more of that stimulus for muscle growth, and not see the same progression. And this doesn't even account for the fact that as we get older or we go through menopause, there are other challenges we're going to face when building muscle. But I've got to tell you, the most common reason I see that clients don't achieve the muscle gains they want is simply because they give up when results are truly building. Not to mention, they hang on to previous dieting and training practices that served them once before when they were trying to reach their fat loss goals. But what we use to reach one goal often isn't what we're going to need to reach another. And especially if we have been on a fat loss journey, what we did to get there isn't what we're going to need to do to build muscle. And by clinging to some of those training practices and dieting practices, we're going to hold ourselves back. I actually had a recent discussion with a client about how she was doing specific cardio before her strength, about how she was really focused on her nutrition, not overeating or even struggling to eat enough. And I realized that a lot of her current practices, while they might have worked to help her lose the fat, were holding her back from gaining muscle, even though she was trying to dial in all those systems together. That's why I want to go over 4 common mistakes we make when we're trying to gain muscle and how you can avoid making them. With making all of these changes, it's key that you keep going past the point you often want to quit. So often we give up just because results aren't happening fast enough. And the reality is results are always going to happen slower than we want. So the more we stay consistent, the more we stay dialed in, and the more we track our progress in all of the systems working together, the better off we're going to be, and the more likely we can make adjustments that really pay off long term. So just remember, what gets measured gets managed. So track your progression, track your nutrition, and make sure that all the systems are working together and that you don't get caught up in what used to work. But don't give up if results are slow. So first things first, you've got to eat to build muscle. It is much easier to gain lean muscle while eating in a calorie surplus. Yes, if you are trying to lose fat and you're in that deficit by focusing on high protein, you can build and retain lean muscle, but you are going to fight against those optimal muscle gains if you are not eating in a surplus. Now you may be thinking, but I'm eating enough that I don't feel hungry. And often we do have to retrain our body to eat more, especially if we're coming out of a deficit where we have been trying to lose weight. So this will be a process where you have to sometimes eat when you don't feel hungry if you're trying to listen to your body and eat intuitively. But you can't fear eating more if you want to gain muscle, because as we add muscle, we're going to burn more calories even at rest. So to be able to not only maintain that lean muscle, you already have to eat more. And then to gain more muscle on top of that, you might have to increase your calories further. So it can be challenging if you have come out of a weight loss phase to see the scale going up and then say, hey, I need to keep eating more even as the scale's increasing. But you've got to create the calorie surplus to be able to add lean muscle. And if you're thinking, I'm really struggling to eat more, try breaking down your meals, try making more calorie dense meals or even snacks. But you've got to find ways to sneak in those calories, because just not feeling hungry doesn't mean that you're actually eating enough to support the lean muscle that you're trying to build in the gym. Your nutrition and your workouts truly have to work together if you want to see the best results as fast as possible. I know nutrition gets all the attention when we do want a fat loss goal or to lose weight, but if you don't create the right stimulus for muscle growth in your workouts, you're not going to see the results you deserve. And so often we have really turned to a ton more cardio when we're trying to lose fat, but we've got to focus on strength training if we want to see those muscle gains. And we can't fear rep ranges or turn all of our strength workouts into simply metabolic workouts. Too often we just try and get out of breath from our lifting, But we need to work through a variety of different rep ranges if we want to see the best results. Even if your goal is hypertrophy and you've heard that ideal rep range is 6 to 12 reps, you've got to do some maximal strength work if you want to see better muscle gains, especially the more advanced you are. If you don't work down in that maximal strength range, you're not going to build more strength to be able to lift more quality loads even when you're working in that hypertrophy rep range. So make sure you include lower rep work with heavier loads for those compound movements even to start your workout. We can't fear higher rep ranges as well, even as we get older, because we've got to work closer to failure. We don't have that same optimal hormonal environment to stimulate muscle growth, so sometimes we have to create a little bit more stimulus through our training. And that does mean working closer to failure. So while we want to work down in reps and use those heavy loads to create that maximal strength so we can lift more quality loads over time, we also need to take those muscles closer to failure. And that comes from including some more isolated work in those higher rep ranges. Even though we traditionally think of that as more strength endurance, we need to include that higher rep work to really work more muscle fibers and take our muscles closer to failure to see that same stimulus for growth. So don't fear other rep ranges or only get caught up in working in that traditionally hypertrophy rep range of 6 to 12. Include low rep heavy work and include that high rep work to end your workouts even with more isolated movements. And the more you combine these rep ranges in a single workout, the better the results you're going to see. And while you need to use a diversity of rep ranges and really work to challenge yourself with those loads, you also can't fear a diversity of different ways of creating progression. Because the more advanced you are, the more you might have hit your upper limit with some of the loads you can lift. You can change postures, tempos, you can use different tools and different equipment to create that progression. But you've got to find different ways to stimulate that muscle growth and really challenge yourself. Because that's ultimately the key. If it challenges you, it will change you. But you can't do that just by trying to force out heavier loads that you can't use the right muscles to perform the movements with. That's why using the diversity of rep ranges and creating progression in different ways is so key. But you've got to find ways to push yourself to failure. Now, the third tip builds off of that in that we have to find ways to make ourselves uncomfortable to create that challenge and change. Because what we're really trying to do is give our muscles a stimulus that they have to adapt from. And this means being very, very, very uncomfortable. Now, that doesn't mean making yourself so sore you can't keep lifting consistently, and it doesn't mean turning your workouts all into cardio workouts that leave you out of breath. But it does mean creating that challenge and that muscular failure. When you're doing this, this might mean that you have to pause to complete the last couple of reps on a round. It might mean that you're using different tempos because you can't lift more. But you've got to find ways to create that progression in your workouts and really challenge your body. Because if you're not challenging your muscles, they're not going to be broken down in a way that they have to grow stronger and rebuild from. But this means the more that you're making yourself uncomfortable in your workouts, the more you have to recover from those sessions. Because we can only train as hard as we're recovering from. This also means that you might need to plan in deload weeks and recovery weeks because mentally you're feeling maxed out. We're challenging our body, and it's very hard to make ourselves uncomfortable in that way. So don't fear adding in recovery and deload weeks because even mentally you need them because you're finding yourself maxed out and unable to push harder, or even compensating and using bad form to try and let ego get in the way to try and get out heavier weights. And the best way to make sure that you're really challenging yourself in a way that creates that progression is to track. Because if you aren't tracking what you're doing, it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall, you don't know what's working. You want to make sure that you're following a clear weekly progression so that you can track those numbers and see those gains week over week. This allows you to make small changes that really add up versus making dramatic shifts that you don't know what is and isn't working. And it might leave you feeling really, really sore just from all the new, but you're not going to see that hard work pay off the way it should. So make sure you're tracking your progressions. Now, as much as we think about eating more to fuel that muscle growth, macros still really matter. If we aren't adjusting our portions of protein, carbs, and fat, we might not be seeing results as fast as possible. Not to mention, as we eat in that surplus and we try and gain that lean muscle, we don't want to just be eating, well, not quality fuel. Because if we're not fueling our body well, we're not creating that optimal environment for muscle growth. Not to mention, we're probably not going to feel like pushing in our workouts. And we're already going to feel uncomfortable from trying to lift heavier and do more. So we want to make sure that we're giving ourselves the readily available energy that we need to really be able to push in our training and not just feeling sort of sluggish and slow because we're eating in a surplus, but we're not eating quality fuel. So make sure you're paying attention to your macros and make sure you're really still focusing on protein. The other thing we can't do is fear carbs. Often to lose fat, to lose the weight, we will cut our carbs lower, but you need those carbs to create that anabolic environment for muscle growth. Carbs are key for that instant fuel. So please do not fear a macro and recognize that what worked as a macro ratio to reach one goal may not work to reach another. But macros still really matter, especially if we want to gain lean muscle without putting a ton of fat on, and to make us feel our best in our training sessions. If you've been struggling to see those muscle gains, use these 4 components to design systems to really work together so that your workouts and your nutrition are helping you see better results faster. Stop blaming your age. You can still see amazing muscle gains at any and every age. And if you are a more experienced exerciser, just recognize it might take longer and that you're gonna really have to make yourself uncomfortable and focus on that fueling. But we can always make a change and create those systems that lead to the best results as fast as possible.